My name is Charlotte Hayes, and at 36, I am the youngest woman ever to serve as Deputy Secretary of State. But none of that mattered as I stepped out of my rented black SUV onto the cracked stone driveway of the Hayes family estate in coastal Maine. The estate was old money, weathered clapboard walls, and sprawling lawns that overlooked the Atlantic, but to me it was a graveyard of judgment. I had returned for one reason only: my grandfather's 85th birthday. I hadn't seen most of my family in years. I'd dodged invitations, ignored veiled guilt trips, and buried my resentment under a pile of diplomatic cables. But something about this year, maybe the guilt, maybe curiosity, made me come back. I regretted it the moment I saw my mother Sylvia standing at the top of the front steps. Arms folded, smile-tight eyes scanning me from head to toe, like I was an awkward teenager showing up late to dinner. "Well," she drawled, "look who finally decided she's too important to be abroad today." I froze, forcing a polite smile. "Good to see you too, Mom." My older brother Edward emerged behind her, his expensive linen suit, immaculate whiskey glass, already in hand. Edward had inherited our grandfather's timber business, and along with it, the unearned confidence of a man whose failures were excused because he at least tried. "Ah, Charlotte," he said loudly enough for nearby relatives to hear, "still out there saving the world, or just running from your personal life again." Their laughter drifted down the stairs, curling around me like cigarette smoke. Inside, nothing had changed. The dining room was full of polished silverware and smug faces. I noticed how they'd seated me at the far end of the long mahogany table, almost as if I wasn't family at all. Conversations swirled past me, Edward's merger this cousin, Olivia's gallery opening that. I spoke up, mentioning a recent international aid agreement I'd negotiated for flood victims in Bangladesh. Edward cut me off before I could finish. "You know, Charlotte," he smirked, "no amount of foreign handshakes will impress a family that values good old American profit." More laughter. I tried to keep my expression serene, but my stomach clenched as Grandfather Philip himself raised his wine glass and toasted Edward. To Edward, he declared, "Who keeps the Hayes legacy alive?" While some people, his glance toward me was sharp chase windmills across the globe. The sting was sharper than I expected. I was a diplomat, for God's sake. I negotiated ceasefires and brokered treaties. But here in this room, I was still just the difficult daughter. After dinner, as I poured myself a glass of water at the sideboard, I felt my mother sidle up beside me. "You really should settle down," she said, her tone syrupy with condescension. "Maybe that's why no one takes you seriously, dear. All work, no family." Her words pierced through me, not because they were new, but because they echoed every single insult I had spent my adult life outrunning. My achievements meant nothing here. I took a long breath, steadying myself. Then, as I turned back to the table, something caught my eye, a black SUV pulling up outside the window. The mood in the dining room didn't shift yet, but I knew the vehicle's diplomatic plates instantly. The front door creaked open without knocking, and there he was, Secretary of State Jonathan Wells, my direct superior, and arguably the most powerful man in American diplomacy. His presence sucked the air out of the room. "Charlotte," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we need you back in Washington immediately." But before we go, I wanted to say something. All eyes were on us. My mother paled. Edward nearly dropped his glass. "Your negotiations last month saved tens of thousands of lives in Sudan and put America back at the center of global peace talks," Wells continued. "We are all in your debt." Then he turned to the table. "You should all know that your daughter's work is being celebrated worldwide. She has done this country proud." Silence, deafening, uncomfortable silence. For once, nobody at the table knew what to say. Their carefully rehearsed script of disdain had been obliterated in a single sentence. I met Edward's stunned gaze and let myself smile. Not smug, not gloating, just serene. "I'm only doing my duty," I replied softly. But inside, something cracked open, a calm, fierce pride I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Secretary Wells nodded to me and stepped back toward the door where his team waited. The SUV's engine idled outside, humming low and steady. As I walked past my family's frozen stairs toward the door, I paused briefly, turning back just once. "Success," I said quietly, "isn't defined by who sits at this table. It's defined by whose lives you improve." Then I stepped outside into the crisp night air. Behind me, the door clicked shut. But as I reached the SUV, a voice called out. Grandfather Philip's voice, suddenly loud, suddenly sharp. "Charlotte," he barked, "you're still a disgrace to this family." I stopped cold hand on the door handle. And that's when the plan that had been forming in the back of my mind crystallized. They thought tonight was over. They had no idea what was coming next as I slid into the back seat of the black SUV. The heavy oak door of the Hayes estate creaked shut behind me, but its echoes followed me all the way to the car. The secretary's security detail gave me a respectful nod as we pulled away from the driveway. But my mind wasn't in Washington yet. No. I sat back, eyes fixed on the sprawling estate disappearing behind us, and felt the bitterness tighten in my throat. My grandfather's voice still rang in my ears. "You're a disgrace to this family." And for once, I wasn't willing to let that stand unchallenged. The image of their stunned faces when Jonathan Wells praised my work still gave me a fleeting warmth. But it wasn't enough. I knew I couldn't leave it at that. I wasn't done here, not by a long shot, because what lay beneath that house's grandeur had been rotting for decades, and it was time I ripped it open. That night, back in my hotel room overlooking the harbor, I sat by the window staring at the lighthouse blinking steadily in the distance. My phone buzzed a message from my younger cousin Isabel, a name I hadn't heard in years. "Saw what happened tonight. Can we talk?" I hesitated before replying. Isabel was the family ghost, the quiet one who disappeared into the background at gatherings. Her opinions overlooked, her life choices dismissed. But she'd been watching clearly, and something about her reaching out stirred an unexpected curiosity in me. "Tomorrow. Breakfast. 8 a.m. I typed, hitting send before I could second-guess myself because part of me needed an ally, and Isabel felt like the right place to start. The next morning, as the cafe filled with tourists ordering overpriced cappuccinos, Isabel arrived. Her hair pulled into a simple braid, no makeup, her cardigan oversized and frayed at the sleeves. But when she sat down and fixed her gaze on me, her expression was sharper than I remembered, laced with a resolve that matched my own. "Charlotte," she began without preamble, "there are things about the family you don't know, things only started piecing together after you left for DC." Her voice was low but intense, and I felt a chill run down my spine because whatever she was about to tell me felt bigger than old resentments or petty cruelty. I leaned in as she continued. "They've been hiding something. Financial fraud, real estate deals that don't add up, and Edward, he's at the center of it." The coffee I had just sipped turned bitter on my tongue as the weight of her words settled. For years, I had been the family's punching bag, while Edward was held up as the golden child. But beneath that polished veneer, he was running the family company into the ground. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice a whisper. Isabel nodded. "I work for one of the auditors who looked at Hayes Timber last year. We found discrepancies, but Edward buried the report, pressured the board. He's keeping grandfather in the dark and probably funneling money offshore." Her confession wasn't laced with bitterness, only determination. And it struck me that I wasn't the only one who had grown weary of this family's facade. For the first time since stepping onto the estate, I felt the faintest flicker of a plan forming in my mind. And it burned bright with possibility. Isabel slid a small USB drive across the table toward me. "This has the preliminary audit data. I couldn't get everything they'll notice if I pull too much, but it's enough to raise questions." Her hands trembled as she spoke, but her eyes didn't waver. And in that moment, I saw a woman who was done being overlooked. "Why tell me?" I asked, curious why she had chosen this particular moment to break ranks. Isabel hesitated for just a breath. "Because you're the only one they can't intimidate," she finally said. "You've built a life outside of their control. You're not dependent on them, Charlotte. And after last night, well, they won't see you coming." Her words hit their mark perfectly. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to people who had decided long ago that I wasn't enough. But now I had a new purpose, not to win their approval, but to expose their lies. Later that day, as I sat alone in my hotel room, staring at the USB drive, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. It was time to stop being a reluctant visitor to this toxic family circus and take control of the narrative. They had pushed me to the margins for decades, belittled my choices, insulted my character. But now I had leverage, and I wasn't going to waste it. I picked up my phone and dialed a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years, Paul Whitman, the family's longtime corporate lawyer, who had once confided in me that he was getting too old to clean up Edward's messes. His voice answered on the second ring, cautious but curious. "Charlotte, haven't heard from you in a while." I wasted no time. "Paul, meet me tomorrow." Discreetly, "We need to talk about Edward's finances." There was a pause on the line long enough to confirm he knew exactly what I was talking about, before he agreed in a low, almost relieved tone. Tomorrow morning, my office, early. That night I barely slept. My mind was a storm of memories. Every dismissive comment, every snide remark, every cold shoulder and forced smile at dinners, where I was treated like an interloper in my own family. I thought of Edward's smirk, my mother's thin-lipped judgment, grandfather's biting toast, and I realized this wasn't just about setting the record straight. This was about finally holding them accountable for more than their cutting words. The Hayes legacy wasn't just rotting from the inside emotionally. It was compromised financially, ethically, and legally. And I would no longer stand by while they congratulated themselves for their superiority. I would be the one to drag their dirty secrets into the light. And as the sun rose over the harbor and bathed my hotel room in golden light, I felt something click into place. My plan had begun. The next morning, I walked into Paul Whitman's office, clutching Isabel's USB drive tightly in my hand. Paul was already waiting, his office filled with dusty leather books and old oil paintings that smelled faintly of wood polish and disillusionment. His expression was guarded, but his eyes flickered with something else, a weary hope. I placed the USB on his desk. "This is just the start," I told him, "and we're going to take them apart piece by piece." Paul leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he studied me. "You've changed, Charlotte," he said finally, almost as if surprised by his own observation. "And this time, they won't see it coming." His words were meant to encourage, but they also foreshadowed what was coming next, because this was more than a family feud now. It was a war for truth, and I intended to win. But as I stepped out of his office and back into the street, a cold wind whipped through the harbor, carrying with it a chill that made me pause. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket, a text from Edward. No words, just a picture of me at the cafe with Isabel the day before, taken through a window zoomed in, grainy but unmistakable. Underneath it, "Careful where you dig, sister." A shiver coursed through me, not fear exactly, but the knowledge that this game was already underway. Edward knew I was onto him, and if he was watching it, meant the stakes had just gotten higher than I'd anticipated. The photograph Edward sent still burned in my mind as I left Paul Whitman's office. His text, a thinly veiled warning, dressed up as a power play. Edward never did subtlety well, but this was different. It was surveillance, and it meant he was nervous. That nervousness was leverage, and I intended to use it. As I walked briskly down the harbor street, I felt the weight of the USB drive no longer in my hand, but now lodged deep in the mechanics of what I was planning, the first domino to tip in a chain reaction I would control. For once, I was not reacting to my family's contempt. I was directing the flow, and that shift in power tasted sharp and electric, setting my pulse racing even as the cold air bit my face. Back in my hotel room, I called Isabel, who answered on the first ring, her voice tight and cautious. "He knows." I said simply. I didn't have to explain what I meant. Isabel went silent for a beat, then said, "That was fast." She was right. Edward had wasted no time making it clear he was watching, which only confirmed that Isabel's data had real teeth. "Stay close for now," I told her. "But keep your head down. Don't give him anything else to work with." She didn't argue, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us that we were in this together, and the fight had officially begun. It was a small comfort, but a powerful one, nonetheless, a reminder that in this family of predators and pretenders, we had each found an ally. Hours later, I found myself driving back toward the estate, not for a social visit, but because I knew the only way forward was through direct confrontation, and I was ready to draw first blood. My mother, Sylvia, was alone when I arrived, perched on the back veranda in her perfectly tailored ivory cardigan, sipping wine at noon, as though nothing in the world could touch her. But I knew better. I knew that she too must be aware of Edward's activities, or at the very least suspicious, and her silence was as much complicity as endorsement. "Charlotte." She greeted me coolly, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Have you finished basking in Mr. Wells' approval?" Her barb didn't land this time. Instead, I stepped forward deliberately, pulling a chair back with a deliberate scrape that made her flinch. "You've protected Edward a long time," I said evenly, letting each word land with weight. "And now you're going to tell me why." For a heartbeat, I thought she'd deny everything, but then she surprised me. Sylvia lowered her sunglasses, meeting my gaze without blinking. "Because your grandfather made it clear decades ago that Edward was the legacy," she said, her voice almost too calm. "He inherited the estate, the company, the name. He was the heir whether he earned it or not. That was the deal. My job was to ensure that arrangement stayed intact." The revelation didn't shock me as much as it clarified the relentless favoritism I'd endured my entire life. This was never about love or merit. It was about maintaining a script she had agreed to play a part in. And that script dictated that I could never succeed no matter what I did or became. My mother wasn't proud of Edward. She was dutiful to an arrangement that had rendered me invisible from birth. "What if I told you Edward's not the legacy you think he is?" I pressed, leaning forward so she couldn't look away. "That he's been bleeding Hayes Timber dry for years, hiding money offshore, falsifying reports to protect his bonuses. Would you still defend him then, Sylvia?" Her breath hitched just slightly. At that, enough for me to know that she suspected, but had chosen blindness as protection. "You don't have proof," she said after a long pause, but there was a crack in her voice, now a fracture, that told me her loyalty was transactional, not emotional. And that fracture was a pressure point I would exploit. I stood the chair, scraping back again with deliberate friction, and I delivered my parting shot. "Then you'd better start asking yourself whose legacy you're really protecting, Mother. Because the storm is coming, and this time I'm the one writing the script." As I walked back to my car, her wine glass tilted in her hand just slightly, betraying the tremor that ran through her, even as she tried to hold her pose. It was the first real sign I had seen that she wasn't as untouchable as she liked to pretend. That evening, Isabel texted again. "Check your email, sent you something urgent." My pulse quickened as I opened the file, a scanned document dated 1987, bearing my grandfather's signature. A codicil to his will. My name was on it. Not as an afterthought, but as a named successor to a controlling interest in Hayes Timber. The language was clear: in the event that Edward proves unfit, control passes to Charlotte Hayes. My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with a dark satisfaction. The document had been buried for decades, hidden from me, and likely from most of the board. But it was real, and it was dynamite. This wasn't just leverage now, this was legitimacy. My claim to the family empire had been written long before Edward had ever signed his first fraudulent check, and it was time that truth saw daylight. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, running through scenarios, conversations, legal moves, alliances. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was my resolve. I thought of my grandfather's disdainful toast, Edward's smirk, Sylvia's practiced cruelty, and realized none of it could shield them anymore. I wasn't coming for their approval. I was coming for the whole house they'd built on secrets and fraud. At dawn, I dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit I hadn't worn in years, a subtle but clear symbol that I was back not as a visitor, but as a challenger. Before leaving, I slipped the codicil printout into my briefcase, along with Isabel's audit file. It was time to draw the circle tighter. As I pulled into the estate driveway, Edward was already waiting at the top of the stairs. Arms crossed, eyes sharp, jaw tight. He had abandoned his casual confidence from the night before. Today, he was armored up for battle, and that only confirmed how deeply he felt the threat. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he called as I approached, his voice low and dangerous. I didn't break stride. "I'm here to talk Edward," I said smoothly, meeting his gaze directly. "But this time, we do it on my terms, or we do it in court." That landed exactly as I intended. His smirk faltered. His posture stiffened, and in that instant, I knew he understood that the old dynamic had flipped. This was no longer a game of snide remarks and whispered insults at family dinners. This was war. As I reached the top step, standing just inches from him, I pulled the codicil from my briefcase and held it out, watching his eyes flick down and widen as the implications hit him. "You've spent years convincing everyone you're untouchable," I said evenly, voice low but steady. "But you're not. Not anymore." The wind whipped around us, the sea air sharp and biting, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, locked in a silent standoff that felt like the culmination of every slight, every wound, every cruel dismissal I'd endured in this family's shadow. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You don't understand what you're walking into." And that was the moment I realized something even darker was waiting beneath the surface of this family's history, something I hadn't yet uncovered, but would soon have no choice but to confront. Edward's warning echoed in my mind long after he shut the front door behind me, locking me out of the estate, both literally and symbolically. "You don't understand what you're walking into," he had said, but I wasn't sure if it was desperation or arrogance fueling his cryptic threat. I sat behind the wheel of my car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the cold stone house that had once been my childhood prison. Something deeper lay under this family's polished surface, something Edward wasn't just hiding but protecting. And that realization sent a sharp current of determination through me. I wasn't simply challenging Edward's ego anymore. I was unraveling something bigger, older, and far more dangerous than petty sibling rivalry. I drove straight to Isabel's apartment on the outskirts of town, a cozy place cluttered with stacks of research papers, old family albums, and open laptops. She had clearly anticipated my arrival because the kettle was already whistling and 2 mugs sat waiting on the table. "He threatened you, didn't he?" she said, before I could even sit down. I nodded, sinking into a chair and rubbing my temples, my mind racing as Isabel pushed a file toward me across the table. This might explain why. I opened it carefully, expecting financial spreadsheets or audit reports, but what I saw instead made my breath catch. Old correspondence between our grandfather and a mysterious legal trust dating back to the 1970s, mentions of undisclosed beneficiaries, secret property purchases overseas, and buried in the middle, a letter referencing a settlement paid to a woman whose name I didn't recognize at all. "Who is the?" I asked, pointing at the name Annabelle Green. The name alone felt foreign, and yet uncomfortably close, like a ghost from a history I'd never been told. Isabel's face tightened. "That's the part I just found out last night. Annabelle Green. She's your Aunt Charlotte." The words landed like a slap. "No," I said instinctively, heart pounding in my chest. "That can't be right. Grandfather only had 2 children, my mother and Uncle Robert." Isabel shook her head slowly. "Not according to this." She tapped the document again, and the cold, hard reality settled in. This wasn't just some forgotten relative. This was a buried scandal, a daughter he had deliberately erased, paying her off decades ago to keep her silent. Suddenly, Edward's reaction made sense. His empire, his reputation, even the inheritance he clung to so tightly, rested on a lie. If it ever became public that our grandfather had another child he had secretly settled with, the legacy Edward claimed as his birthright would crumble. And worse, if that daughter or her descendants had any legal claim to Hayes. Timber Edward's financial empire was sitting on a legal fault line that could split it in 2 at any moment. The entire hierarchy they had used to suppress me was built on a secret shame they'd kept hidden for almost half a century, and it was about to collapse. I sat back, adrenaline surging, realizing what this truly meant. Not only could I expose Edward's fraud, but the very foundation of his claim to the company was compromised. It explained Sylvia's behavior too. Her cold loyalty, her refusal to ever praise me, her obsession with maintaining appearances. She had been protecting this rot for decades, not out of love for Edward or grandfather, but out of fear that the entire facade would collapse if even one crack was exposed. I looked up at Isabel, and her expression mirrored my own shock and grim determination intertwined. "Where is Annabelle now?" I asked, needing to know if this ghost from the past was alive, real a witness to all of this. Isabel hesitated. "That's the problem. She vanished after that last settlement letter in 1980. No death certificate, no forwarding address, just gone. The room felt heavier, as though generations of secrets were pressing down on both of us at once. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone, already pulling up contacts. "If she's alive," I said slowly, "we're going to find her." Because without her voice, this was all conjecture, but with her, it was the key to finally breaking the Hayes family's stranglehold on me, and on Isabel too. That night, I barely slept again. But this time, my mind wasn't racing with fear, it was planning. Every insult, every dismissal, every cold look across polished mahogany dinner tables had been designed to keep me in my place, but I had never been in my place. I had always been standing on the edge of this buried truth, and now I was ready to pull the entire rotten edifice down around them. I drafted emails to private investigators. Before dawn, circling names and addresses from old records Isabel had saved, piecing together Annabelle Green's last known movements, like a puzzle whose picture I was determined to see. By the following afternoon, one investigator had already called back with a lead. "We believe she's alive, Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice precise and professional. "And we think she's living under an assumed name in New Hampshire." The rush of adrenaline nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Annabelle wasn't dead, she wasn't a ghost, and that meant she could speak. As I hung up, the weight of what this meant settled on me all over again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was energizing. Annabelle Green held the final piece, and I would not let her slip away again. I arranged to meet her in person. No intermediaries, no delays. As I drove north through winding mountain roads toward a modest lakeside town in New Hampshire, the late autumn air smelled of pine and old leaves, crisp and biting. My mind turned over every possibility. Why had she stayed silent for so long? Would she even want to speak to me? Would she understand what I needed her to confirm? The answers didn't matter yet. The act of finding her, of facing the truth directly, mattered more than whatever she would say when I arrived. I was doing what none of them had ever expected of me, not just standing up for myself, but digging straight into the marrow of the family's darkest secrets. Finally, I pulled into the driveway of a small cabin by the water's edge, smoke curling from the chimney curtains, drawn tight against the world. I sat for a long moment before getting out, heart pounding again, but this time steady-focused. I walked to the door, each step deliberate, each breath slow and controlled. When I knocked, the door creaked open almost immediately, as though she'd been expecting me. The woman who stood before me was older now, her hair streaked with gray, her posture weary but proud, and her eyes sharp in a way that told me she recognized exactly who I was before I even said my name. Her first words caught me off guard. "You look just like your mother." There was no anger in her voice, no surprise, only a resigned familiarity that cut deeper than any accusation. I swallowed hard. "You're Annabelle Green," I said softly, and she nodded. She stepped aside wordlessly, inviting me in, and as I crossed the threshold into that quiet cabin, I felt something shift inside me. This was no longer a simple quest for revenge or vindication. It was a reckoning. The past was alive here, waiting to speak. And as I sat down opposite her at a small wooden table, I knew that whatever she was about to say would change everything. Not just for me, but for the entire family, who thought their secrets would stay buried forever. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and something sweet tea, or maybe old wood polished carefully over the years. But what struck me most was how small and simple it was compared to the sprawling Hayes estate. Annabelle Green moved slowly but deliberately as she poured tea into two mismatched mugs, placing one gently in front of me without a word. Her silence was unnerving, but not cold. It felt like patience, like she was weighing how much of her story I already knew and how much she was willing to reveal. I waited, letting the silence stretch, feeling the sharp contrast between the carefully constructed lies I had grown up with and this woman's quiet presence, and for the first time in days, I felt that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. "You came to ask why," Annabelle said, finally, her voice soft but edged with a steel that age hadn't dulled. "And I think you already know the answer, or at least part of it." I nodded slowly, sipping the too hot tea, needing to anchor myself in something tangible, because her gaze alone made me feel unsteady. "I know they paid you to disappear," I said carefully, my voice low. "I know you're my mother's half-sister. I know they erased you." Her lips curved in something between a smile and a grimace, and for a fleeting second, I saw a shadow of my mother's expression in her features. But where Sylvia's face was always carefully controlled, Annabelle's revealed the pain that had never been hidden but merely buried. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm your mother's sister, and I was the first Hayes heir, the one they didn't want." Her words settled between us, heavy and irrevocable. The first Hayes heir. The phrase itself shifted the ground beneath me, forcing me to recalibrate everything I thought I knew about the family hierarchy that had defined my life. I leaned forward, drawn in despite myself. "Why?" I asked, needing to hear it from her directly. Annabelle's gaze didn't waver. "Because I was born to your grandfather and a housemaid. Your mother and Robert's mother was his proper wife, but I came first. When I was old enough to understand the difference, he sat me down and told me exactly what my place would be." She sipped her tea, then as if recounting a casual anecdote, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying the pain that still lived under the surface. "And then he paid you to go?" I said, not as a question, but as a confirmation of the inevitable cruelty that felt all too familiar. Annabelle nodded again. "It was more than money," she said quietly. "It was exile. He bought my silence and ensured that no one in that house would ever speak my name again." Her voice hardened as she continued. "And your mother watched. She was just a teenager, but she watched him erase me and never said a word." The pieces fell into place faster than I could keep up Sylvia's obsessive control. Her coldness, her endless loyalty to the Hayes name. It hadn't been loyalty at all. It had been complicity baked in from childhood, passed down like an heirloom no one could speak about, but everyone understood. I set the teacup down too hard, the clatter breaking the fragile quiet of the cabin. "And Edward," I said, my voice rough. "Did he know?" Annabelle's face softened just slightly. "Your brother knows everything," she said simply. "They told him before he even took over Hayes Timber. Your grandfather made sure of it. Edward was his true legacy, and I was the stain he wanted kept hidden at all cost." The rage I felt was different this time. It wasn't the sharp defensive anger of being belittled and dismissed. It was something deeper, colder. A righteous fury that settled low in my chest like an ember waiting to catch. Edward had known all along and still dared to look me in the eye as if I were the outsider, still dared to hold court at family dinners, as if he sat on an unshakable throne. His throne was built on quicksand, and I was ready to let it sink. I reached across the table and gently laid my hand on Annabelle's. "You're not invisible anymore," I said, and the simple truth of it felt like a promise more powerful than any contract they'd ever forced her to sign. Her hand trembled, but she didn't pull away. "I never wanted their money, Charlotte," she whispered. "I just wanted them to acknowledge I existed." Her voice cracked then, not from weakness, but from decades of holding this weight alone. And in that crack, I recognized something I hadn't expected: kinship. Annabelle and I had both been ghosts in that house, punished for daring to exist outside the script they had written for us. As I drove back south toward Maine that night, my mind moved quickly, now sharper and more focused than it had ever been. Annabelle had confirmed everything I needed, not only Edward's awareness, but the fact that Sylvia and grandfather had engineered this conspiracy together. It wasn't just Edward's empire that was built on lies, it was the entire Hayes legacy. And with Annabelle's voice, I could tear it down legally, morally, and publicly. The old hierarchy that had ruled our family for generations was brittle now, paper-thin and ready to burn, and I was holding the match. Before I reached the hotel, I called Paul Whitman again, my voice calm but urgent. "We have a new witness," I said simply. "Annabelle Green, my mother's half-sister, grandfather's firstborn." The silence on the other end of the line was longer this time, and when Paul finally spoke, his voice was hushed with awe and apprehension. "This changes everything," he said simply. "Yes." I agreed, already pulling into the hotel parking lot. "And I want to move fast. I don't want them to have time to prepare." Paul didn't hesitate. "Then we'll file the paperwork this week," he promised. His words felt like a final key turning in a long sealed lock, and I exhaled slowly, knowing that once this began, there would be no turning back. But as I stepped into my hotel lobby, phone still in hand, another message awaited me, a single-line text from an unknown number that sent a chill straight down my spine. "Stop this or you'll regret it." No signature, no explanation, just a clear warning that whoever had sent it was watching me closely and wanted me to know it. I stared at the words for a long moment before deleting the message without replying. The war had escalated now from quiet contempt to active threats, and that was exactly what I needed. It meant they were scared. Fear was a crack I could exploit, and I would widen that crack until the entire edifice collapsed around them. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I didn't feel alone at all. Annabelle's story had connected us not just as forgotten women, but as two people who had been forced into silence by the same ruthless legacy. And now we were both free, and that freedom came with a purpose sharp enough to cut through every lie that had held us down. Tomorrow, I would return to the estate not as a visitor seeking acceptance, not as a daughter begging for scraps of approval, but as the rightful heir and the woman who had finally uncovered the truth they had fought so hard to bury. And as I closed my eyes, the image of Edward's face when he saw me at the top of those stairs returned to me, tight with fear, flickering with doubt. He thought this battle was about family pride or corporate control, but he was wrong. This was about justice. This was about exposing everything they had hidden. And the next time I stepped onto that estate, I wouldn't be asking for a seat at the table, I would be flipping the entire table over. The morning I returned to the Hayes estate, the sky hung low with thick gray clouds, the kind that threatened rain, but held it back just long enough to make the air heavy and tense. The gravel under my shoes crunched louder than usual as I walked toward the front steps, carrying nothing but a slim leather folder containing all the documents Paul Whitman and I had prepared overnight. This was no longer about proving myself worthy of this family, it was about proving this family unworthy of the pedestal they had always placed themselves upon. I didn't hesitate when I reached the door. I pushed it open without knocking because I didn't need permission anymore, and that alone was enough to announce that the balance of power had shifted. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with whispers word had traveled fast. I could feel their eyes on me from every corner, cousins and aunts, who once laughed behind their wine glasses, now falling awkwardly silent. My mother appeared first, descending the grand staircase in a tailored silk robe, her expression a mask of cool amusement that no longer fooled me. "Back again, Charlotte?" she asked, the smirk barely veiled. "Come to deliver another speech about your self-importance." I smiled, but it was a different smile this time, one that came from knowing she was about to lose far more than the argument. "Not a speech, Mother," I said calmly. "Just a reading of facts." And this time, I brought receipts. Edward appeared next, emerging from the library, his face taut, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitch. "This is harassment," he snapped before I could say another word. "If you think you can storm in here and—" But I cut him off with a raised hand, stepping into the center of the room, my voice steady and clear. "Enough, Edward. This isn't about what I think. This is about what I know." I opened the folder, pulling out the codicil that named me as successor. If Edward proved unfit, a document my grandfather had signed decades ago, but conveniently hidden from me until now, this alone would have been enough, I said. My eyes locked on his, watching the color drain from his face, as the gathered relatives leaned in, sensing that history was about to be rewritten before their very eyes. "But it gets better," I continued smoothly, laying down the next page, a printed copy of Isabel's audit reports showing clear evidence of Edward's financial misconduct, embezzlement, and fraud. "This," I said, "proves Edward isn't just unfit. He's a liability." Gasps filled the room as the weight of my words settled in, and I saw for the first time the beginnings of doubt flicker in the eyes of the extended family who had always followed Edward's lead without question. But I wasn't finished, because the final blow was still to come, and it would break not just Edward, but the entire myth of Hayes' superiority. "And then there's the," I said, placing the last document on the table, a notarized statement from Annabelle Green herself, acknowledging her relationship to our grandfather and her erasure from the family legacy. "This isn't just about fraud or corporate mismanagement," I said quietly. "It's about lies that go back generations. Lies all of you have lived under without knowing it. Lies that ended today. the silence that followed was absolute. Even my mother had lost her veneer of cool detachment, now her eyes wide, her face pale. For the first time in my life, I held this room not as a daughter begging for approval, not as the outsider they mocked, but as the one who finally held the truth they had all ignored. Edward made one last desperate attempt, stepping forward, his voice raw with fury. "You think you can just waltz in here with some old documents and tear everything down? You're not one of us, Charlotte. You never were." His words would have cut me once, but now they felt hollow, pitiful. I met his gaze without blinking. "That's the point, Edward," I said softly. "I never was one of you, and that's why I can end this." I turned deliberately toward the gathered relatives, raising my voice just enough to fill the grand foyer. Effective immediately, I'm exercising my right as controlling stakeholder to call an emergency board meeting. Hayes Timber will no longer be Edward's personal playground, and the board will see everything I've brought today. The room erupted into a low, stunned murmur, but I didn't stay to soak in the chaos. I walked past Edward without another word past my mother, who looked as though she had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes, and out onto the front steps where the wind whipped sharp and cold against my face. For the first time in my life, I felt weightless, not because the fight was over, but because I had finally stopped carrying the burden of trying to be what this family demanded. The estate behind me still stood, but inside the old hierarchy had crumbled, and they all knew it. There would be meetings, legal proceedings, fallout, but none of that could ever undo what I had done today. At the car, I paused, letting the sea air fill my lungs, feeling the salt and wind cut through the last shreds of doubt. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, a message from Paul Whitman. "Board meeting scheduled for Monday," it read. "They're expecting you to lead." I smiled this time for myself, because that was what this had always really been about. Not revenge, not recognition, but taking back my agency, my name, my power. As I climbed into the car, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. Calm, clear-eyed, resolute, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. But even as I drove away, I knew this wasn't quite the end. Before leaving the state, I stopped once more at a quiet lakeside cafe where Isabel was waiting for me, a knowing smile already playing at the corners of her mouth. "You did it," she said simply as I slid into the chair across from her. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "We did it." And that was the truth that mattered more than any board meeting or legal maneuver, that in a family built on silence and secrets we had created something else. Solidarity, honesty, connection. As we sat sipping coffee, I thought of Annabelle's quiet dignity, of Isabel's courage, of my own hard-won clarity. And for the first time in years, I stopped bracing for the next attack. The house behind me could keep its polished silver and heavy curtains. The future I was building didn't belong to that legacy anymore. I would lead Hayes Timber, but I would do it differently. No more shadows, no more hierarchy, no more blind loyalty to a name that had once erased so many. The company would become what it should have been all along, a place built on integrity and purpose. And in that moment, as Isabel laughed at something small and silly, the weight that had anchored me to that estate for so many years finally lifted for good. This was the true ending, not in courtrooms or boardrooms, but right here with a quiet promise to myself that whatever came next, I would never again shrink to fit their expectations. They had underestimated me for decades, but they would never forget me now. Story 2. Despite living off of me and refusing to meet my needs, my wife consistently advocated for feminism. Her flawless image was shattered by what happened after I interrupted her. In my 3rd year of community college, I met my wife Melissa, a 32-year-old woman. In order to pay for my tuition, I worked part-time at a lumber yard while I was a construction management student. In her final year at the state university, she was this gorgeous brunette who was majoring in both business and women's studies. Not in my league at all. However, I was delivering supplies for the new student center that was being constructed on her campus when she somehow noticed me. In hindsight, I ought to have recognized the warning signs sooner. I took her to this family-run Italian restaurant on our first date. The food was amazing, but it wasn't fancy. After remarking on how charming it was, she talked about this upscale rooftop restaurant in the heart of the city for half the night. But my jokes made her laugh. When she spoke, she touched my arm. She was the most attractive woman I had ever met, and damn if she wasn't. We were married after 2 years of dating. She was very focused on her professional goals at the time, including breaking glass ceilings and becoming a high-level executive. I listened to her practice interviews, worked extra hours to help pay for her graduate school applications, and gave her my whole support. Being with someone so driven and ambitious made me incredibly proud. Things changed after we were married at the age of 25. Slowly, not all at once, like rock being eroded by water. Her professional aspirations inexplicably turned into lavish tastes and lack of effort. After graduating, her first job was managing the office of a small marketing company. Because her boss didn't see her potential and expected her to perform low-level, uneducated tasks, she quit after 3 months. She was asked to prepare coffee for a client meeting by that boss. As this was going on, I was working really hard to advance from basic construction to assistant project manager to crew leader. Melissa worked as a receptionist part-time, but her jobs were never longer than a few months. The same story every time. It was a sexist boss. The atmosphere was poisonous. Work-life balance was not valued by the organization. At the same time, I was working more than 60 hours a week, returning home with sore muscles and dirt under my fingernails, even though I was promoted to management. Together, we purchased our first spot. Technically, I did purchase it. About 4 years ago, it was the down payment for my mortgage. It was a simple 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood with good schools close by. I was planning ahead. Perhaps someday children Melissa got right into discussing renovations. How the master bathroom needed a total makeover because she deserved a soaking tub, and how we had to update the kitchen because this countertop is so outdated. At first, I didn't mind. She didn't intend to do any of the work herself, which surprised me because I assumed she wanted to make our house a home. No, these were professional jobs that required high-priced contractors. Not something her husband could do on the weekends, as he literally oversees construction projects for a living. I had advanced to managing large development projects by the 5th year of our marriage, supervising dozens of employees, millions of dollars in budgets. Since we were married, my pay had more than doubled. However, Melissa viewed our improved financial situation as her personal shopping fund, rather than a chance to save for the future. An ordinary day proceeded as follows. At 5 in the morning, I forced myself to get out of bed and went to the gym for a brief workout. The only thing that kept my stress level under control at the time was being on site. 7 a.m. I would spend the day resolving conflicts between subcontractors, handling permit concerns, and ensuring that deadlines were fulfilled. Even after being promoted to management, my hands would still be calloused. My head would be pounding from staring at blueprints, and my back would be killing me by the time I got home at around 7 o'clock. Walking through that door to a good meal and a wife who pretended to be pleased to see me was all I wanted, literally the only damn thing I wanted. Rather, Melissa would be relaxing on our expensive leather couch browsing Instagram or watching a reality show about wealthy housewives with shopping bags from shops where t-shirts cost more than some of my coworkers made in a day. The house was a constant mess. Takeout containers stacked in the trash laundry all over the place and dishes piled high. I would be told, "Oh, I ordered DoorDash," if I inquired about dinner. "It should arrive in about half an hour. You can send me your half via Venmo. Send me a Venmo for your share." Take a moment to process that. Even though I had no job or money, I stocked a fridge and paid for clothes in the house where she sat. She couldn't be bothered to cook, so she expected me to Venmo her for my half of the takeout she ordered. The first few times I simply transferred the money to her without saying anything. I was too exhausted to debate. However, it always happened. This knot tightened in my stomach. When we first got married, we had frequent sex. Normal, healthy intimacy that had decreased to perhaps once a month. Nothing extraordinary. Always according to her terms. Every time she desired something. I became aware of the pattern. She would show me extra love just before telling me about a costly purchase she had to make. She would act as though she was deserving of a goddamn medal on the few occasions she cooked. Jake, I made this pasta for hours. It was frozen meatballs and box pasta with jarred sauce. No more than 20 minutes. Throughout my childhood, my mother managed to put hot meals on the table every night, despite working part-time as a school secretary. Not that I was hoping for a housewife scenario from the 950s. Cleaning and cooking don't bother me. I know how to take care of myself, having grown up with 2 brothers. But I was working 12-hour days and traveling an additional hour each way while she was at work. What she spent her time shopping, watching Netflix, and having lunch with her friends, all of whom were either living off of trust money or their husbands. The tipping point was approaching. I simply wasn't aware of it yet. One Friday in July was the culmination of it all. I had just completed a huge transaction that would result in a sizable bonus. We may be discussing mid-5 figures. The project was a new mixed-use development downtown, and even though supply chain problems had been plaguing everyone since COVID, I was able to complete it under budget. That afternoon, I was pulled aside by my boss, who shook my hand and informed me that I was being considered for a senior project manager position, which would increase my pay to a solid 6 figures. Driving home for a man who began as a basic laborer with only an associate's degree made me incredibly happy. The major leagues were this. Perhaps Melissa and I could celebrate, so I paused and grabbed a dessert. Perhaps get back in touch a bit. Perhaps this good news would make her feel something. Tell her about the team we were. It was 6:30 p.m. when I entered. Calling out, "Baby, I'm home early for me." I received some fantastic news. She was in the living room as usual, browsing through her phone. She looked up for a moment. "There's no food, hey. I didn't anticipate your early return." I presented the dessert. We could celebrate, I thought. Phillips is considering me for senior PM, and the downtown project came in under budget. She put down her phone. "I suppose it's progress." "Oh, that's good. What exactly does that mean?" I gave an explanation of the bonus, the potential for promotion, and the pay increase. I could see her figuring out how much more she could afford as I spoke. She never expressed her pride in me or recognized the effort that had been required to reach this goal. "Rather, that's ideal timing," she said, "as this weekend in Chicago, there's a feminist podcast panel discussion. Every well-known person will be present. The tickets cost about $500. We would also require a hotel. However, your bonus is on the way." She walked away. I hoped we could celebrate together this weekend. Perhaps have dinner at Giovanni's. We had gone on our first date to that Italian location. "My favorite restaurant in town is still this one." She pulled a face. "Giovanni's? It's really simple there. In addition, this panel is crucial to my professional network. They're talking about what it's like for women in corporate America today." I was powerless to stop myself. "How well-versed in corporate America are you?" "It's been years since you had a job for longer than 3 months." Her eyes narrowed, and her face instantly changed. "Please pardon me. That is really inconsiderate. You are aware of how poisonous the workplace is for women with education. Just the microaggressions." I put the dessert down on the coffee table and interrupted. "We should discuss how things are going." She gave a dramatic roll of her eyes. "What is it about right now?" I'm attempting to calm myself over this. I pointed to the mess that was our marriage. "I feel like you're just going along for the ride while I'm carrying everything." She could have frozen hell with the look she gave me. "Please pardon me. Are you really bringing up this bullshit about a patriarchal woman doing housework? I wasn't married to serve as your personal chef or maid. Employ someone with your large, manly salary if you want someone to clean up after you." I almost choked. "Melissa, this has nothing to do with gender roles. It's about collaboration. I put in a lot of effort throughout the day, and you don't do anything. Not cash, not effort, not even a simple gesture of gratitude. Don't do anything." Her eyes blazed as she sat up straight. "I make a lot of contributions. I oversee our social life. I keep us in touch with people who can help you advance your career. Are you aware of the weariness that comes with being a woman in today's culture? Just the emotional work." "Emotional work," I interrupted her. "I know men who work in hazardous jobs that degrade their bodies for families, yet they still come home and support their wives. It has nothing to do with your gender. It has to do with your entitlement and laziness. Lazy. Lazy!" An octave was added to her voice. "What I do all day is unknown to you. I'm not necessarily not working just because I'm not out having fun with your construction buddies. I'm upholding our reputation and social status. There was no humor in my laughter. The only persona you're keeping up is on Instagram, where you spend money you didn't earn while acting like a boss babe. Anger flushed her face as she rose to her feet. Just a strong woman who knows her value is threatening you. This is not how my father would ever talk to my mother. Your father earns 7 figures as a corporate lawyer. In addition, your mother ran a charitable foundation while raising you and your sisters. They aren't exactly like our predicament. That was a slight. Raising her affluent family. They had never given me their full approval. Not quite good enough for their princess, the blue-collar guy. Although they had covered the cost of our wedding, they made it apparent that they believed Melissa was settling. I occasionally questioned whether she shared my opinion. It's unbelievable that you're attacking me in this manner, on a Friday evening when I just wanted to unwind. This is almost abusive. After snatching up her phone, she hurried out of the room and slammed the door of our bedroom. The unopened dessert on the coffee table was taunting me as I stood in the disorganized living room. While Melissa was at self-care appointments, I took a soda out of the refrigerator and sat on the back deck, gazing at the yard I had landscaped over the weekend. Something changed inside of me as I sat there in the encroaching darkness. It wasn't a difficult time. It was more than just a bad day. My life was like this. I'm working myself to the bone. To pay for a way of life for someone who didn't value it, didn't help pay for it, and seemed to be angry at me for asking. I gave myself permission to think carefully about whether this was what I wanted to do for the next 40 years for the first time. I was truly astounded by how obvious the answer was. Absolutely not. I slept on the couch that night. When I woke up in the morning, Melissa had already stopped using her passive-aggressive method of discipline. My phone was alerted about a credit card, $600 at Nordstrom. 8:15 a.m. is the timestamp. It was an obvious message. I'll make you pay if you cross me. She had no idea that I had finished paying for the weekend. When Melissa bothered to be home at all, she broke the silence only to make passive-aggressive remarks. She made sure I saw every designer label as she carried her shopping bags upstairs after spending the majority of Saturday with her friends. She would say, "I suppose you won't mind me buying these shoes to make myself feel better since you think I'm so worthless." The screen of her phone then flashed, revealing a further purchase worth several $100s. My credit card was just charged by her. She told her friends she was going to brunch on Sunday morning and that she shouldn't stay up because they might go to a spa the next day. I simply nodded while already making plans. The thing about construction project management is that it teaches you to be methodical. Without knowing what lies behind a wall and what will happen once it is gone, you don't just tear it down. You accurately plan, evaluate, and carry out. I was going to handle my marriage just like that. Melissa was spending more of my money with her friends, who were a mix of women who were living off of their husbands and advocating for female empowerment, as well as trust fund babies who had never worked a day in their lives. For the first time in months, I took a seat at my desk and took a close look at our finances. I felt sick to my stomach after discovering what I did. Despite my steady income, we had less than $5,000 saved. Over $30,000 was owed on 6 separate credit cards, the majority of which came from Melissa's shopping and spa days. She had even taken out a Nordstrom store credit card that I was unaware of, maxed it out at $7,500, and been using our joint checking account to make minimum payments. I took out the last 6 months' worth of our bank statements. Melissa spent almost $6,000 a month on average for things like restaurants, Uber Eats, Sephora clothing salon visits, wellness treatments, and whatever the hell those were. More clothing. It had been a year since I had purchased new work boots. I was still using the same old gym bag I'd had since college, even though I needed them. My dad and I went fishing. "We don't have the extra cash right now, sweetie, so the things I've been talking about for years kept getting put off." Rather than confronting her when she arrived home drunk from brunch at 7 p.m. that Sunday, I made my move while she was enjoying herself in the bathtub while using the pricey bath bombs I had given her for Christmas. I took my laptop and started making some adjustments to my finances. I started by transferring the majority of our joint funds into an account that was only accessible by me, leaving just enough money for the following month's utilities and mortgage. I then put a $200 weekly limit on the one credit card she still had and canceled the others. Finally, I configured alerts for any purchase that exceeds $50. She had been texting a number I didn't recognize on a regular basis, I discovered when I checked our cell phone account. Late at night, usually, the messages were not read by me. I mentally noted the number, even though I didn't want to at the time. She checked her phone after taking an hour-long bath. It was a nuclear explosion. How on earth did you do that? Clad only in a towel, she screamed and rushed into the living room. She raised her phone, displaying notifications of decline. I can't get my cards to work. I was watching a baseball game on the couch and didn't even get up. Simply gave her a direct look. To match your contribution to this household, I just calculated your spending limits. Before settling on anger, her face went through roughly 5 different states. That is not possible. Financial abuse is what that is. I'll give my sister's friend, a lawyer specializing in women's rights, a call and proceed. I said, astonished at how at ease I felt. Tell a judge that it is abuse when your husband pays all the bills while you spend thousands on designer handbags. Explain why you haven't had a job for longer than 3 months or years while you're at it. She growled, "You're acting like a domineering jerk." This is not how a true man would treat his wife, so I got up almost a foot taller than her. No, a true man would no longer allow his wife to walk all over him. Do you wish to lead a princess's life as a partner? Begin to contribute. It was the first time I'd seen her. Melissa couldn't say anything. She opened and shut her mouth several times, but nothing escaped. She slammed the bathroom door so forcefully that a picture fell off the wall as she finally turned and stomped back there. She slept in the guest room that night. For the first time in years, I slept well. I left a note on the kitchen counter the following morning before I left for work. I have created a budget that accurately accounts for our earnings and outlays. The weekly personal spending limit on your card is $200. Get a job if you want more. We can talk about changing the budget if you choose to support our family financially or by helping out around the house. This cannot be negotiated. Melissa was gone, and the note was torn to pieces on the counter when I arrived home that night. It was only after I had gone to bed that she returned home. Thus started our marriage's Cold War. The weeks that followed were, to put it mildly, eye-opening. Without having unrestricted access to my funds, Melissa's true nature was evident. In her social media posts, she consistently advocated for female empowerment and independence. I noticed that although behind closed doors, she was still sharing motivational sayings about recognizing your value and refusing to settle. Her inability to purchase the things she desired was causing her to have a total breakdown. I was invited to Westfields for brunch by my friends. During our first real conversation in days, she complained one morning that Westfields was an expensive restaurant downtown that charges $30 for avocado toast. What should I say to them? That I can't leave because my husband is too frugal? Tell them anything you want. In response, I packed my work lunch, something I had started doing to cut costs. Alternatively, you could work and cover the cost of your own brunch. A job, she said, as if I had advised her to try eating rocks. You are aware of my feelings regarding capitalism's exploitative nature. I nearly burst out laughing at her. This is from the woman who stocked our closet with 13 different high-end handbags. You seem to be okay with being taken advantage of when it gets you nice things, but not when you have to work for them. Over the course of those weeks, she tried everything, crying, yelling, guilt-tripping, and even trying to woo me. When it didn't work one night, after weeks of no physical contact, she began accusing me of being abusive because I expected her to live on a tight budget. Her feminist friends started bombarding my phone with messages about toxic masculinity and how limiting her money is a form of control. One even claimed that a strong woman intimidated me. That one almost made me laugh. Your husband expects you to behave like an adult, so throwing a fit wasn't particularly strong. In a sort of intervention, Melissa and 3 of her friends were sitting in our living room when I got home one evening, obviously waiting for me. Amber, who was twice divorced, was constantly posting about how bad men were. After one too many victories, Melissa told me that Kayla had been cheating on her husband for years while working as a successful real estate agent, and she swarmed me to secrecy. Rachel, on the other hand, lived off her parents' money while operating a wellness coaching business that was barely functioning. As soon as I walked in, Jake Amber started worrying about Melissa. She has informed us of your financial dominance over her. Without removing my work boots, I placed my lunchbox on the counter. It's an intriguing viewpoint. She is entitled to financial autonomy. Rachel added her voice. You're engaging in a traditional form of abuse. I glanced at each of them before turning to face Melissa, who was sitting there looking smug as if she had me in the corner. What do you know? Yes, Melissa, you're correct. Definitely merits financial autonomy. Actually, I support it. She ought to work, make her own money, and spend it as she pleases. That is the definition of independence. At least Kayla had the grace to appear uneasy. Jake, it's not that easy. Marriage is a collaboration. Your funds are jointly owned. It's funny that when she spends it, it's only joint money. But it's just expected when I'm working 60-hour weeks to earn it, I said. Tell me if tomorrow I decide to resign from my job and spend time at home with Melissa providing for us. Would you all be present to defend my joint money claim? Then for a while that silenced them. Melissa's voice trembled with what I now realized was fake emotion as she jumped in. Jake, you're making things up. I make other contributions, just the emotional work. What precisely is this emotional toil you speak of? I cut you off. Since I work all day, come home, prepare my own food, do my own laundry, and receive no emotional support from you from where I stand. Please let me and your friends know exactly what work you are doing. The quiet was overwhelming. Amber finally got up and picked up her high-end handbag, most likely covered by alimony from the second husband. We will not remain here while you verbally abuse our friend. I'll let you stay with me tonight, Melissa. I gave a shrug. I'm good with that, however you might want to bring a bag. After some time, Amber's one-bedroom condo may become claustrophobic. Melissa paused only to retrieve some clothes from her essential toiletries before they all stormed off. I enjoyed the quiet of my own home for the first time in months after locking the door behind them. After about a month of this new arrangement, the real wake-up call arrived. One day, I left work early and came home. After a last-minute cancellation of the concrete delivery due to a supplier issue, Melissa was discovered in our bedroom, searching through my side of the closet. She looked really guilty and jumped when I walked in. She was holding the old Omega watch that my grandfather had given me before he passed away. The only item I had from him was worth a few $1,000s. Not a fortune. With that, what are you doing? My voice was dangerously quiet as I asked. She quickly straightened up and went from feeling guilty to being defiant. I was merely observing it. Bullshit. You tried to accept it. Her face flushed perfectly, but she rolled her eyes. I intended to list it for sale on eBay. For my hair appointment, I needed money. And this budget is irrational on your part. I have expectations to meet. I was truly astounded as I looked at her. In order to obtain highlights, this woman whom I had loved and supported for years was prepared to sell a family heirloom. Give the watch to me. I extended my hand and spoke slowly. After a moment of hesitation, she huffed and handed it over. You're acting absurdly. You are being a thief, and it's only a watch. It is more than a watch. It's all I have left for my grandfather. However, you don't give a damn about that, do you? You are only concerned with yourself. Oh, please. She laughed. Be less dramatic. I transferred the watch and all other valuables to a secure deposit box at my bank that evening. I had been sleeping in our guest room for weeks when I lay in bed. I knew there was no way to save this marriage. Either this self-centered, entitled stranger had taken the place of the woman I had married, or she had never existed at all. But after being used for years, I wasn't going to simply leave. No, I would want this to end on my terms. After 6 weeks of the new financial arrangement, Melissa's flawless image began to show signs of deterioration as she stopped going to her regular salon appointments. She was spreading her roots. She had chipped nails. She was unable to purchase new designer clothes, so they were being worn more frequently. Her attempt to stay with Amber had only lasted a week before she returned, muttering something about the two of them needing time apart. I suppose Melissa's ability to contribute to wine nights and pay for out-of-town dinners was the extent of Amber's hospitality. I thought the sound of the shower would drown out her phone conversation one night, but our bathroom vent sent the sound directly to the guest room, where I was now sleeping all the time. Melissa muttered, "It's so humiliating," obviously assuming I couldn't hear. He's behaving as though I'm a gold digger, considering all that I have given up for this marriage. I had to suppress my laughter by biting my tongue. What had she given up exactly? Her professional shopping career? No. I've attempted to speak with him, she added. He simply does not understand. Wifehood is a full-time job. Just the emotional work ought to be compensated. Once more, the phrase emotional labor appeared. When she first threw it at me, I looked it up on Google. It seemed to refer to the unseen tasks of running homes, scheduling social gatherings, and remembering birthdays. A good idea indeed. But none of that was done by Melissa. I was the one who made sure we had toilet paper before we ran out, who planned our furnace maintenance, and who remembered her mother's birthday each year. She was now saying, "Well, I can't exactly just leave." She spoke in a lower tone. "I have nowhere to go, and my name is not on the house. After the whole credit card incident last year, my parents have already stated that they will not help me out again. A credit card disaster." What was the credit card disaster? I was unaware of this, but it clarified why her parents had lectured her about financial responsibility and been so aloof during Christmas. "I understand," she added. "I'm trying to help him. Eventually he will give in. It's always men like him. They experience guilt. All I have to do is be kind for a while, make him believe that I'm attempting." I made the decision to start recording everything at that point. I started taking pictures of the house both before and after I left for work, demonstrating that nothing had been done. All of my grocery bill and household expense receipts were preserved. I made loan payments. When she refused to get a job and kept demanding more money, I recorded our conversations. Was it petty? Perhaps, but I had a feeling that when this all fell apart, I would need proof. When our joint credit card company called me regarding suspicious activity, that was the real turning point. Melissa apparently attempted to apply for a new card under my name. Outright identity theft. She pretended that I was exaggerating when I confronted her. She sneered. "It's not like we're not married. I mean, what's yours is mine. You mentioned that in our vows, didn't you?" I answered. "I also promised to love and cherish you. It's funny that you only recall the information that helps you." I called a lawyer that evening. I changed my direct deposit and opened a new checking account at a different bank the following day. I didn't leave any more money in our joint account than was necessary to pay the bills. Not hidden on the bookshelf next to our wedding photo, I also placed a tiny camera in the living room. When Melissa saw it and questioned, "What the hell is it?" I didn't miss the irony. I told her directly, "It's safety. I want to make sure the house doesn't lose anything else." She was enraged and yelling about trust and privacy. "You tried to steal my identity to get a credit card," I said, glancing at her. "You have to earn trust." I also learned at this time that she had been texting her former college boyfriend. Her parents had approved of the trust fund kid, but who abandoned her during her senior year. She received numerous messages expressing her misery, how I failed to comprehend her, how she could have been wrong. I refrained from confronting her about it. I have included it in my expanding file. She was unaware that I had previously met with a divorce lawyer, a fierce woman who focused on defending men in high-stress divorces. She would explain everything to me and suggest that I continue to keep records while organizing my finances. She told me that leaving the house before the court proceedings start is the biggest mistake men make. Remain where you are, document everything, and avoid any actions that might be interpreted as abandonment. I therefore did just that. I remained observed recorded and bided my time until Melissa revealed her true nature. There wasn't much waiting for me. We've been in our new arrangement for 3 months. At last, Melissa appeared to recognize that her strategies were failing. The sobbing, the charges, the coercion. Nothing was returning her to her former way of life. She therefore tried being kind as a new strategy. All of a sudden, she was trying to prepare dinner, but it was always burned or hardly edible. She started attempting, but failing, at small household tasks. For the first time in months, she even offered to have sex, which I graciously refused. I wasn't going to fall for it, and to be honest, it made my skin crawl to think of having a close relationship with someone who had so obviously displayed their true nature. Every time something didn't work out for her, the mask would come off, similar to the time she tidied the kitchen. However, she lost her temper when I pointed out the moldy food that was still in the refrigerator. I damned tried, at least. Nothing ever meets your standards. God. I was getting my act together in the meantime. At 5 in the morning, I was doing my usual workout. 15 pounds of stress weight had been lost before work, and I was beginning to feel like myself again. I got back in touch with friends. They were beneath us, so she had cut me off. My cousin, who lived in a trailer, but was the most sincere person I knew. My high school friend, who had become a police officer, and my construction crew friends, whom she considered to be blue-collar. In addition, I was discreetly preparing for my divorce. Everything my lawyer needed was there. Documentation of Melissa's carelessness with money. Proof that she had done almost nothing for our family. Evidence that she tried to steal her identity. Texts her former partner. In our state, assets are typically divided 50-50. Given the situation, my lawyer was certain that we could argue for an uneven split. I was the only owner of the house itself. Melissa had never made a mortgage payment while we shared the house, which I had purchased shortly before we were married. The protection of my retirement accounts was comparable. Even though it was for her expenses, the debt would be more complicated because the majority of it had been accrued during the marriage. In what would be our last week together one evening, Melissa came over to me with what appeared to be sincere regret. She said, "Jake, I know I've been terrible," with tears in her eyes and a trembling voice. "In every way you were correct. I've been entitled and self-centered. I exploited your generosity and hard work. Could we please try again? We are missed. I'll find employment. I'll recover." I almost believed her for a second. Her eyes filled with tears and her voice caught. It was convincing. Then I saw a notification light up on her phone on the coffee table. I could plainly see a dating app message preview because she had left it facing up. She had already started searching for the ticket to her next meal. I chose to comply and said, "I miss us too. We might be able to resolve this." Her expression of relief was almost comical. She believed she had triumphed. "Really?" "Oh, I'm so happy, Jake. Things will be different, I assure you." I gave her a half-hearted hug in return after she leant in to do so. I suggested that we discuss how to proceed. Perhaps come up with some specific plans. She gave an enthusiastic nod. "Of course. Anything you desire." I suggested that you look for a job as a first step. If at all possible, something dependable with advantages. Right now, nothing is beneath you. Food service or retail might even be a place to start. I kept a close eye on her face. She had a fleeting moment of disgust before gathering herself. "Naturally. Actually, I've been considering jobs in administration. That should be made easier by my business degree." "Great," I said. "Additionally, we ought to create a household chore chart. Distribute duties equitably. One more glimmer of annoyance. But that makes sense. I'm not very good at cleaning, you know. I simply never learn things correctly." "You can learn from me," I said with a bland smile. "It isn't that difficult." For a while, we continued in this manner, with me proposing sensible partnership behaviors and her grudgingly accepting them while obviously detesting every moment. I finally admitted that I was exhausted and went to the guest room. She said, "You could sleep in our room tonight," with a look on her face that I used to find alluring. "If you so desired. We should go slowly, in my opinion." Rebuilding trust before resuming any physical contact was my response. Trying not to show her disappointment, she nodded. "Naturally, anything you require." I let myself a tiny smile as I shut the door to the guest room. She genuinely believed she was winning. She didn't know what was going to happen. I took a day off work 2 days after Melissa's sincere apology. I informed her that I would be returning home late because I had meetings all day. Avoid waiting up. I got her to believe me. Why wouldn't she? I had never told her a lie before. After cleaning the house properly for once, she earned a small allowance, which she intended to use for shopping. She had tried to sound responsible by saying, "Just some basics, nothing ostentatious." As a thank you for her efforts, I nodded and increased her weekly limit by a small amount. Actually, I wanted her out of the house while I carried out the last part of my plan. I took action. At 9 a.m., the movers showed up. Sharp. A group of 4 men from my present workplace who were delighted to earn some extra money during their day off. Over the previous week, I had already packed up the majority of my personal belongings. Boxes are gradually being stored in my truck and transported to my new location during lunch breaks. I told them to just take the items I had marked with blue tape, put everything else aside. I had been meticulous about it, marking only furniture that was unquestionably mine items that I had either inherited from family or purchased prior to marriage. The living room's large television. Hers, she had insisted that we needed the sectional couch. My dad's old leather recliner is also staying. My bike weights and workbench from the garage. I was taking those with me. I'd already used some of the money I had been discreetly saving to pay for 3 months' rent in advance for a new apartment near my work site. It was a simple one-bedroom apartment with a tiny balcony that looked out over a park. However, she was unaware that it belonged to me. I made one final check of our bedroom to make sure I hadn't missed anything crucial while the movers were at work. She had chosen the clothes for me over the years, and I opened the closet to see them. Designer shirts. It never made me feel at ease. My feet hurt from the expensive shoes. I abandoned them all. The movers completed packing everything into their truck by midday. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and freedom as I took one last tour of the house. I spent 7 years of my life here. Not every memory is negative. Good times had also been had, particularly in the early going. However, it was time to leave. I left 3 items on the counter in the kitchen. I've already signed the divorce papers. A letter outlining the specific reasons our marriage had failed, along with a USB drive that contained all of my proof of her actions. The letter wasn't spiteful or furious. It was straightforward and described how her choices, behaviors, and attitudes had methodically destroyed everything we had worked so hard to achieve. I wished her luck and hoped she would find what she was looking for as I concluded. I gave our wedding photo, which was still on the bookshelf, one last glance before leaving. We appeared so joyful and hopeful. What had become of those individuals? I shook my head, set my wedding ring and house key besides the divorce papers, and left, shutting the door behind me. After that, I shut off my phone, got into my truck, and headed 3 hours upstate to my friend Mike's cabin. When I explained what was happening to Mike, he offered it and as a haven. "Dude, you'll need a place to unwind," he said. "Somewhere she can't immediately find you." He was correct. I slept better than I had in years, drank beers by the fire pit, and fished on the lake over the weekend. No calls, no texts, no social media, just tranquility and the realization that I had regained control of my life. On Sunday evening, I eventually turned my phone back on. Melissa and her friends left me 23 voicemails, 134 texts, and 87 missed calls. I only heard one voicemail in which she was crying uncontrollably. "Please don't do this to me, Jake. I have nothing. Since your name appears on the lease and you have terminated it, the landlord says I have 30 days to vacate. This place is too expensive for me. Give me a call back, please. Do you see the home we occupied?" She always told her friends that I had been renting it, not buying it, accumulating funds for a down payment on a future home. I now understood that I would never have lived with her in that house. When I explained the situation, the owner, a cool older guy, had been understanding. In exchange for giving Melissa 30 days to find a new residence, he had agreed to terminate my lease early. I read a few of the texts, each one more urgent than the one before it. "Please respond to me, Jake. You're where you cannot simply leave me in this manner. Tell me where my belongings are at the very least. Is it true that you believed I was texting Brad? It was not what it appeared to be. If you don't answer, I'm going to call the police." When the landlord arrived, he informed us that we were being evicted. "What did you do?" "According to my lawyer, what you did was unlawful. I've got nowhere to go, Jake." The messages from her friend were worse, packed with insults and threats. "What a pitiful excuse for a man you are. We are filing a domestic abuse report against you. When we're through with you, you'll regret this. True men never desert their wives. We were always aware that you weren't suitable for her." I texted my lawyer after blocking each of them individually. "It's finished. She has located the documents. She should get in touch with you tomorrow." The messages from unidentified numbers continued for the following week. After I blocked her, she went from being desperate to threatening to pleading while using her friends' phones. After my lawyer sent cease and desist letters, her feminist friends stopped getting in touch with me. Apparently, when confronted with real legal repercussions, their bluster vanished. 2 weeks after I moved out, I received the last message. "Jake, it wasn't like the others. Now I understand. I made a huge mistake. In every way, you were correct. This week, I applied to 3 different jobs. Amber, with whom I'm staying, has already hinted that I'll have to pay some of the rent. I had no idea how much you helped me. I sincerely apologize for taking you for granted. I would appreciate it if you could assist me until I am able to stand. Perhaps give me enough money to cover a small apartment's security deposit. I'll reimburse you, I swear. My lesson has been learned. At last, I sent a single message in response. It seems like you're finally adjusting to life as a self-sufficient adult. Well done on your personal development. Within 60 days, the divorce will be finalized. Never get in touch with me again. Then I permanently blocked her number. The fallout was essentially what you would have expected. My attorney was outstanding, utilizing the vast amount of evidence I had acquired to refute each and every assertion made by Melissa's hurriedly hired lawyer. They attempted to claim that because she had maintained our home and helped me with my career, she should have half of everything. When we presented pictures of the house's state and evidence that she had spent more money on salon visits in a single year than she had made to our household during our marriage, the judge literally burst out laughing. Finally, we reached a settlement. I accepted the debt. After I paid off some of it, she had accrued about $25,000, and she waived any claims to my future earnings and retirement accounts in return. I paid off her car, so she kept it along with her clothes, some furniture, and her name. I was free. Now 6 months have passed. The divorce was completed more quickly than anticipated. It turns out that judges are less receptive to claims that you deserve half of everything when you can provide proof of attempted identity theft. I purchased a modest home close to my workplace. It's a simple ranch with 2 bedrooms on a quarter-acre lot. However, it belongs to me. Purchased. Using the down payment I had been surreptitiously saving for years, and the bonus I finally received. It's always serene and clean. No live laugh love signs, no designer throw pillows. Only cozy furnishings and the flexibility to leave my work boots anywhere I damn well please. Casually, I'm dating again. Nothing major. At my friend's barbecue, I got to know Sarah, a nurse. She can change her own oil works 12-hour shifts at the hospital, and even offered to split the check during our first date. When she did so, I nearly fell out of my chair.